Hello, I'm Caleb Miller, 36 years old, a civil engineer living in Portland, Oregon. If you've ever been here, you'd know that rain in Portland isn't just weather, it's a part of life, tapping on windows, seeping into clothes, and sometimes even into the soul. I live in a small apartment on the third floor of an old building, where the windows overlook streets shimmering with the hazy glow of streetlights under the rain. I'm not the kind of person who talks much about themselves. Honestly, I'd rather spend all day calculating the load for a bridge than talk about what's going on in my head. But if I must, I want you to understand that my life, like a structure, is built on sturdy concrete pillars, yet it's not without cracks that only I know about. I grew up in the suburbs of Seattle in a red brick house with a white picket fence where everything had to be perfect, at least on the surface. My parents, Walter and Susan Miller, were the embodiment of that perfection. My father, a retired accountant, always wore a pristine suit even if he was just going to the grocery store for a loaf of bread. He had a habit of straightening his tie whenever he was stressed, as if it were his way of keeping everything under control. My mother, an elementary school teacher, had a perfect smile in every family photo. But behind that smile were unwavering rules. Family honor comes first, she'd often say, her voice soft but sharp as a blade. Never give the neighbors a reason to gossip. My younger sister, Ava, and I grew up under those rules, but we were as different as day and night. I was the rock, steady, quiet, always doing what was expected. I excelled in school, graduated with a degree in engineering from the University of Washington, and moved to Portland to work for a construction company. My job is to build bridges, sturdy structures that connect two riverbanks, and I love the feeling of controlling numbers and blueprints. My life, at least in my eyes, is like a technical drawing, clear, planned, with no room for deviation. Ava, on the other hand, was a flame. At 30, my sister was once a passionate journalist, always chasing big stories. Ava had eyes that sparkled as if they could light up a room and a way of speaking that made you feel like you were living in a novel. I still remember when she told us about her first investigative piece about a forgotten fishing community on the Washington coast. She sat at our parents' dining table, her hands gesturing animatedly, her voice brimming with excitement, while my father just shook his head and said, "That girl, always dreaming." But I saw the light in Ava's eyes and I was proud, even if I never said it out loud. Then Ava met Ethan Campbell. That man swept into her life like a gust of wind, with a confident smile and sweet promises. Ethan, the creative director of an advertising firm in Seattle, had the air of someone who always knew what he wanted. He wore impeccably tailored suits, drove a sleek Audi, and spoke in a way that made you think he could sell the sun itself. I didn't like Ethan much. There was something about him that felt insincere, but Ava was different. She loved him so much she forgot the rest of the world. They married after a year of dating, and soon after Ava gave birth to twin girls, Chloe and Sophia. I still remember the day my nieces were born. I drove from Portland to the hospital in Seattle, clutching a bouquet of carnations, Ava's favorite flower since childhood. When I walked into the room, Ava was lying in bed, her hair damp with sweat, but her eyes shining brightly. She cradled two tiny red-faced baby girls in her arms. "Caleb, look," she whispered, her voice choked with happiness. "Chloe and Sophia. They're my whole world." I stood there, silent, feeling my heart soften. I'm not good at showing emotions, but in that moment, I just wanted to hug my sister and tell her she'd done the most incredible thing. I thought everything would be fine. Ava had Ethan, her two daughters, and I believed she'd have a happy life. I returned to Portland, went back to my work, and continued my life with Abigail, my wife. Abigail is a legal specialist, intelligent, sharp, with a smile that could melt away all my stress after a long day. We've been married for 4 years, and though we don't have children, yet we had plans. A bigger house, a vacation in Hawaii, and maybe one day the sound of children's laughter in our home. But life, as I've come to realize, never follows the blueprint. Everything fell apart on a stormy night in Portland. I was sitting in my apartment listening to the rain tapping on the windows, holding a cup of cold coffee. My phone rang, and I saw Ava's name on the screen. I frowned. She rarely called this late. "Caleb." Her voice trembled over the phone as if she were holding back tears. "Ethan, he's been cheating. He wants a divorce." I sat up straight, nearly dropping the coffee mug. What? What happened? Where are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but my mind was already in chaos. Ava took a deep breath and said, her voice breaking, I'm at Mom and Dad's, but they won't let me in. I thought I'd misheard. Won't let you in? What do you mean? I asked again, my voice louder than intended. Ava repeated, each word cutting into my heart like a knife. They said I'm a disgrace. They kicked me out, wouldn't let me in the house. I'm standing in the rain with Chloe and Sophia. I don't know what to do, Caleb. Please help me. Her voice broke, and I heard the faint cry of a child through the phone. I didn't think twice. Wait for me, I said, my voice firm. I'm coming. I grabbed my car keys, my jacket, and rushed out the door. Rain lashed at my face as I ran down the stairs and jumped into my old pickup truck. The drive from Portland to Seattle takes over 3 hours, but that night it felt like a lifetime. The rain poured relentlessly, the headlights dim in the sheets of water, but I didn't care. All I could think of was Ava, my sister, standing shivering in the rain with her 2 little girls. I thought of our parents, of the heavy oak door of their Seattle house where we grew up. How could they do this? How could they turn their backs on their daughter, on their 2 young granddaughters, just because they were afraid of what the neighbors might say? I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to suppress the anger rising in my chest. I didn't want to think about our parents right now. I just wanted to get to Ava. When I reached the familiar suburban neighborhood, the rain was still falling, as if it meant to drown the world. Our parents' red brick house appeared under the street lights, its white picket fence soaked. I saw Ava immediately. She was huddled under the porch clutching Chloe and Sophia, the 2 girls wrapped in blankets asleep on her shoulders. Ava's blonde hair was plastered to her face, her thin jacket not enough to shield her or the girls from the freezing rain. I stopped the car, opened the door, and ran to her. Ava, I called, my voice hoarse from the wind and rain. She looked up, her eyes red but tearless. Maybe she'd already cried herself dry. Caleb, she whispered, her voice frail. I don't know what to do anymore. I knelt in front of her, pulled the blankets tighter around Chloe and Sophia, and took my sister's hand. Come on, I said. I'm taking you home. I don't know where I found that calm, but I knew this wasn't the time to be weak. I helped Ava stand, took the girls in my arms, and led her to the truck. When I opened the back door and placed Chloe and Sophia in the car seats I'd bought for the future, a sharp pain stabbed at my heart. This wasn't the future I'd imagined, but it was reality, and I had to face it. In the truck, I turned on the heater and asked Ava if she was okay. But she didn't say anything, just stared out the window, her hands clenched tightly. I wanted to ask her everything about Ethan, about what had happened. But I knew now wasn't the time. Instead, I played an old Fleetwood Mac song, Landslide, because I remembered Ava used to love it. The soft music filled the space, and I saw her shoulders relax slightly. Chloe and Sophia stirred occasionally, but they were too young to understand what was happening. I wondered what Ethan had done to reduce Ava to this state. That man with his smug smile and empty promises had destroyed my sister's family. And our parents, the people I once thought would always protect us, had cast her out into the street. I didn't know who I was angrier at. When we reached my apartment, it was nearly dawn. The faint light of sunrise broke through the rain, illuminating Portland's glistening streets. I led Ava and the girls up to my apartment and settled them in the living room. I pulled out an old crib, lined it with blankets, and placed Chloe and Sophia inside. Ava sat on the sofa staring at her daughters with empty eyes. Thank you, she whispered, but her voice lacked life. Go to sleep, I said, resting a hand on her shoulder. Everything will be okay. But as I said those words, I knew they weren't entirely true. Things wouldn't be easy, not now. But I also knew that no matter what happened, I wouldn't let Ava face this alone. Never. The first few days with Ava and the 2 baby girls staying at my apartment felt like an endurance test I was never prepared for. My small apartment, which had barely been enough for Abigail and me, was now cramped with the sounds of crying babies' bottles and stacks of diaper bags piled in the corner. I didn't complain. Honestly, I'm not the type to whine. But I couldn't deny that my life had been turned upside down. I woke up earlier, brewed coffee, reviewed technical drawings, then hurriedly changed Chloe or Sophia's diaper while Ava was still lost in her exhaustion. She barely left the sofa, clinging to her 2 girls, her gaze vacant, as if searching for a piece of herself that was gone. Abigail, my wife, was patient at first. She helped me prepare breakfast, warmed bottles for the babies, and even sat with Ava trying to pull her out of her silent shell. Abigail was always good at keeping things balanced. That's why I loved her. She could juggle complex legal contracts at work and still come home with a bright smile. But I started noticing small signs. The way she sighed when Sophia cried in the middle of the night. The look she gave me when I spent the evening soothing Chloe to sleep. Or the way she quietly moved her belongings to a corner to make room for Ava's things. "Are you tired?" Abigail asked me one evening as we sat in the kitchen after a long day. She was holding a glass of wine, her eyes weary but her voice still gentle. I looked at her, searching for an honest answer. "Yes," I admitted, rubbing my forehead. "But Ava needs me. She has no one else." Abigail nodded, but I saw the corner of her mouth tighten slightly. "I understand," she said. But there was a distance in her voice, as if she were trying to convince herself. Over the following weeks, a new rhythm began to take shape, though it was far from easy. I went to work each day inspecting bridge construction sites on the outskirts of Portland, where concrete pillars and steel cables gave me a sense of control I no longer found at home. Ava started opening up, even if just a little. She told me about Ethan, about the signs she'd ignored, the late nights he came home, the messages he hid, and finally his cold confession that he had fallen for someone else. A younger, more interesting colleague. I listened, feeling my blood boil, but I held it in, nodding and squeezing her hand. "You'll get through this," I said, though I wasn't sure how easy that would be. Chloe and Sophia, though only 5 months old, were the only light in those gloomy days. I never expected I could love 2 little girls so much. Every morning when I picked up Sophia and saw her smile, her big round eyes looking at me like I was her whole world, I felt a strange strength. Chloe was different. She was fussier, but every time she gripped my finger, I felt like I could do anything to protect them. I got used to waking up at 3 in the morning to make bottles or carrying a diaper bag whenever I went out. I even learned to sing lullabies, though honestly my voice was so bad that Ava burst out laughing when she heard me sing "Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star" to Sophia. But not everything was smooth. Abigail started to change. The evenings she used to spend with Ava and me, chatting about small things, turned into moments of silence. She often stayed late at the office or retreated to the bedroom early, claiming she needed to rest. I noticed her growing distant, but I didn't know what to do. Every time I tried to talk, Abigail would give a faint smile and say, "I'm fine, Caleb. You focus on taking care of Ava and the girls." One evening after Ava had gone to bed and the girls were asleep, Abigail pulled me out to the small balcony of our apartment. The rain had stopped, but the air was still damp and cold. She crossed her arms, staring out at the street shimmering with streetlights. "Do you ever think about us?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. I was taken aback, unsure where this was coming from. "What do you mean?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Abigail turned to face me, her eyes glinting with frustration. "I mean our life, Caleb. Before Ava and the girls came, we had plans. A bigger house, a vacation, a family of our own. What about now? You spend all day taking care of your sister and your nieces and She paused, taking a deep breath. "I feel like I'm on the sidelines." I wanted to say something, but my throat tightened. I knew she was right. I'd let Ava and the girls consume all my time and energy, but I couldn't turn my back on my sister, not after what she'd been through. "Abigail," I said, placing a hand on her shoulder, but she gently brushed it off. "You don't get it," she interrupted. "I'm not selfish. I know Ava needs you, but I need you too. We're married, Caleb." The conversation ended in silence. Abigail walked back inside, closing the door behind her, leaving me alone on the balcony. I looked down at the street, where the lights reflected off the wet pavement, and felt an invisible crack growing between us. I told myself I'd find a way to fix it, but deep down I knew it wouldn't be as simple as a technical drawing. I stepped back into the apartment, the steady patter of rain on the windows like a reminder that the storm outside hadn't let up. I sank onto the sofa, gripping my phone tightly, trying to sort through the chaos in my mind. I thought about our parents. Would they change their minds? Would they reconsider? Did they feel even a shred of remorse for turning their daughter out into the rain? I decided to call Mom. The phone rang for a long time, each ring stretching the tension in my chest. Finally, her voice came through, cold and measured, like she was reading an official statement. "Caleb, it's late. What's this about?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom, it's about Ava. She's staying with me. I thought, you and Dad should know what's happened." I recounted the story briefly, not wanting to prolong the pain. Ethan's affair, his demand for a divorce, and Ava showing up at their house in the rain with her 2 babies only to be turned away. I paused, waiting for some hint of emotion from the other end of the line. Silence. Then Mom spoke, her voice sharp as the blade I'd known since childhood. Ava brought this on herself, Caleb. A proper wife doesn't let her husband walk away like that. I taught her how to keep a family together, but she didn't listen. I don't have a daughter who gets abandoned by her husband like that. I felt my blood surge, but I held it in. Mom, she's your daughter. She needs help. Chloe and Sophia are your grandchildren. Don't you see how wrong this is? Kicking Ava out in the middle of a storm. A sigh came through the phone as if I were inconveniencing her. Caleb, you don't understand. Our family has honor. What would the neighbors think if they saw a daughter abandoned by her husband standing at our doorstep with 2 children? Your father and I can't have the whole neighborhood talking. I gripped the phone so tightly I thought it might break. Honor, I nearly shouted, but caught myself when I heard Sophia stir in the living room. You're talking about honor when you left your daughter standing in the rain with 2 5-month-old babies? Do you even hear yourself? Don't be disrespectful. Dad's voice cut in, heavy and stern, like when he scolded me for breaking the garage window as a kid. He must have been listening on speaker. The Miller family has no place for stains. Ava chose her path. She has to face the consequences. You should be careful, Caleb. Don't let yourself get dragged into this mess. I stood frozen, unable to believe what I'd just heard. Dad, Ava is my sister, your daughter. Don't you feel any responsibility? Our responsibility is to uphold the family's honor, Dad said, his voice hard as steel. If you want to help your sister, that's your choice. But don't expect us to get involved. The call ended with a cold beep. I stood there in the dim hallway staring at the phone screen. I thought of Ava, her lost expression when I found her under our parents' porch. I thought of Chloe and Sophia, 2 innocent children branded as stains by their own grandparents. The rain outside kept falling as if trying to soothe the rage burning in my chest. Over the next few months, the tension in the apartment grew thicker. Ava started to recover, but she still relied heavily on me. I didn't blame her. Being a single mother to 2 infants wasn't easy, especially after being betrayed by her husband and disowned by her parents. But Abigail was different. Her comments grew sharper, like, "Are they going to stay here forever?" Or, "I didn't sign up to live with your entire family, Caleb." I tried to explain that it was temporary, that Ava would get back on her feet soon, but even I wasn't sure how long that would take. One evening, everything exploded. I was sitting on the sofa, holding Sophia while Ava bathed Chloe. Abigail walked in, clutching a stack of papers, her eyes cold. "We need to talk," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. I set Sophia in her crib, stood up, and followed Abigail to the bedroom. She closed the door and turned to me. "Caleb, I can't do this anymore." "Do what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "You know exactly what," Abigail snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "You spend all day on Ava and the girls. I'm no longer your priority. I don't want to live in a house where I feel like an outsider." I wanted to argue, to say that she was still important to me, but the words wouldn't come. I knew she was partly right. I'd let Ava and the girls consume my time and energy. But how could I abandon my sister? How could I leave her alone after everything she'd been through? "I want you to choose," Abigail said, her voice like a knife. "Me or Ava? You can't have both." I stood there, feeling the floor collapse beneath me. "Abigail," I whispered, "you can't ask me to do that." But she just shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. "You just made your choice," she said, then turned and walked out of the room. The days that followed were heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Abigail began packing her things bit by bit. I tried to talk to convince her we could work it out, but she only looked at me with distant eyes. "You're a great brother, Caleb," she said one morning as she pulled her suitcase toward the door. "But I need a husband." I stood at the door watching Abigail walk away, her suitcase rolling down the hallway. The sound of the wheels echoed like the final rhythm of our marriage. When the door closed, I felt a void growing in my chest, but I didn't cry. I couldn't cry. I turned back to the living room where Ava was holding Sophia, her eyes full of worry. "Caleb, what's going on?" she asked. I shook my head, not wanting to burden her further. "It's nothing," I said, sitting down beside her. "Everything will be okay." At this time, I wasn't sure I believed those words anymore. The days that followed were quieter in the apartment, but it was a heavy kind of quiet like the lull before a new storm. Abigail was gone, leaving me with Ava, Chloe, Sophia, and an apartment now filled with voids I didn't know how to fill. I tried to keep everything steady, going to work, taking care of the girls, and making sure Ava didn't notice the cracks in my heart. But every night, lying on the sofa listening to the rain tap against the windows, I couldn't stop thinking about Abigail, her smile, and the plans we'd made for a future that had now dissolved. Ava, though still fragile, began to regain a spark in her eyes. She no longer spent all day curled up on the sofa. Instead, she started doing small things, brewing coffee for me in the morning, folding clothes for Chloe and Sophia, or softly humming as she rocked the girls to sleep. One evening when I returned from a construction site, weary with the smell of concrete and dust clinging to my clothes, I found Ava sitting at the kitchen table, an old notebook in front of her. She was writing, her pen moving swiftly across the page, her eyes focused as if she were rediscovering a part of herself. "What are you writing?" I asked, pulling up a chair across from her. Sophia was asleep in her crib, and Chloe was playing with a stuffed animal on the rug. Ava looked up, a little embarrassed, then slid the notebook toward me. "Just some thoughts," she said softly. "I think I need to write them down so I don't forget what I've been through." I flipped through a few pages, reading her slanted handwriting. They weren't just random thoughts. Ava wrote about that rainy night, standing huddled under our parents' porch clutching Chloe and Sophia. She wrote about Ethan, how he shattered her world with his cold words. She wrote about me, how I drove over 3 hours to pick her up, becoming her only anchor when everything collapsed. My throat tightened as I read. "Ava," I said, setting the notebook down, "this is really good." She smiled, a faint but genuine smile. "I don't know, Caleb. I just thought, if I write it down, maybe I'll figure out who I am after all this." From that day on, the notebook became Ava's companion. Every night after the girls were asleep, she sat at the kitchen table, writing under the dim glow of a table lamp. Some nights, she wrote until late, her eyes red, not from sadness, but from rediscovering herself page by page. I didn't say much, just quietly brewed coffee, set it beside her, and sat nearby reviewing blueprints or scrolling through news on my phone. I knew she needed space, and I wanted her to have it. One morning as I was getting ready for work, Ava called me back. "Caleb, can you read this?" She handed me a stack of papers much thicker than the original notebook. "I think I've finished a part of it. I want to know what you think." I sat down and flipped through the pages. It was Ava's story from the day she met Ethan, through the joyful months of her pregnancy with Chloe and Sophia, to the betrayal, the rainy night, and her journey as a single mother. But what moved me most was how she wrote about me. She called me a lighthouse in the storm, the one who pulled her out of the darkness. I looked at her, trying to hide the tears welling in my eyes. "Ava, it's really special. You should do something with it." "Do something?" she asked, frowning. "What do you mean?" "Like, publish it," I said, though I wasn't sure how realistic the idea was. "Your story, it could inspire others. People going through what you've been through." Ava laughed, but it was a skeptical laugh. "Who'd want to read about me? A single mom ditched by her husband and disowned by her family." "A lot of people," I replied, my voice firmer than I felt. "Because you're not just someone who was abandoned. You're someone who got back up." Those words seemed to hit Ava. She went quiet, staring at the stack of papers, then nodded. "I'll think about it," she said, but I saw a small spark in her eyes, like a flame starting to catch. I didn't want to push her, but the idea of Ava's book stayed with me. I started acting quietly. One lunch break at the construction site, I called Ben, an old college friend who now ran an independent publishing house in Portland. Ben was always a dreamer, passionate about books and true stories. I told him briefly about Ava, about the memoir she was writing, and asked if he'd be willing to take a look. "Send it over," Ben said, his voice excited. "If it's as good as you say, I'll consider it." I didn't tell Ava about the call. I didn't want her to get her hopes up, only to be disappointed. Instead, I encouraged her to keep writing a little each day. I bought more paper, pens, and even an old laptop for her to type on. Every time I saw her sitting at the screen typing with absolute focus, a quiet pride swelled in my chest. The Ava from before, the passionate girl always chasing stories, was coming back. Months passed, and Ava's manuscript took shape. She titled it "Shelter from the Storm." I read each chapter, fixed typos, and occasionally offered suggestions, though I knew I wasn't a writer. "Caleb, are you sure it's okay?" Ava asked one night when the manuscript had grown to over 200 pages. "It's more than okay," I said, resting a hand on her shoulder. It's you, Ava. It's your story. Finally, I convinced her to send the manuscript to Ben. I still remember the day she hit send on the email, her hands trembling, her eyes a mix of excitement and fear. What if they don't like it, Caleb? She asked. Then you're still Ava, I replied. And you've done something most people wouldn't dare. Tell your story. 2 weeks later, Ben called. I was at the construction site, standing at the base of a bridge in progress when my phone rang. Caleb, your sister's manuscript. It's really special, Ben said. It's raw, emotional, and powerful. I want to publish it. I nearly dropped the phone. Really? I asked, my voice higher than usual. Absolutely. But I need to meet Ava to discuss the details. Can you arrange that? That evening, I told Ava. She sat frozen, clutching her coffee mug as if she couldn't believe her ears. Caleb, are you serious? They want to publish my book? Absolutely, I said, smiling. Ava threw her arms around me, tears in her eyes. Chloe and Sophia, playing on the rug, looked up at us, as if sensing the joy in the air. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Ava met with Ben and his team, revising the manuscript, designing the cover, and planning the release. I stayed on the sidelines, supporting quietly, driving her to meetings, watching Chloe and Sophia when she was busy, and making sure she had time to focus. I didn't want her to know I'd contacted Ben early on. I wanted this to be her victory. Hers alone. The day sheltered from the storm officially hit the shelves. I stood in the corner of a small Portland bookstore, watching Ava sign her first copies. She wore a simple green dress, her blonde hair tied up, but her eyes shone brightly, as if the fire within her had been reignited. Only a few dozen people showed up, mostly Ben's friends and some curious readers. Ava was so nervous she dropped her pen twice, but when she started talking to the crowd, her smile warmed the entire room. I stood there, holding Sophia in my arms, Chloe clutching my finger, and felt a quiet pride swelling inside me. My sister, who had once stood shivering in the rain, was now standing under the lights, sharing her story. The book's initial sales were modest. I wasn't surprised. Publishing is a tough industry, and Portland isn't New York. But one evening, as I was preparing a bottle for Sophia, Ava burst into the kitchen holding up her phone, her face flushed with excitement. Caleb, look at this, she nearly shouted. A reader, a single mother from Seattle, had posted about the book on social media. Shelter from the Storm isn't just a book. It's a flame for those who've been abandoned. Read it. You won't regret it. That post, like a spark, spread rapidly. Hundreds of shares turned into thousands. Women's groups online began discussing it, calling Ava a quiet hero. Within weeks, the book sold tens of thousands of copies and made it onto a local newspaper's weekly bestseller list. I still remember the moment Ava received an email from Ben announcing that a major publisher had offered to partner for a nationwide release. She sat at the kitchen table, reading the email over and over as if she couldn't believe her eyes. Caleb, she whispered, is this real? I laughed, pulling her into a hug. It's real, little sis. You did it. From there, everything felt like a dream. The book didn't stop at the US. A publisher in the UK offered to translate it for an international English edition, followed by France, Germany, and even Japan. I don't know how Ava felt seeing her name on book covers in languages she couldn't read, but I noticed how she stood taller, smiled more. She was no longer the Ava from that rainy night. She was Ava Miller, author, mother, and a symbol of women who had been hurt but refused to fall. With the book's success came invitations. First was a local talk show in Portland, where Ava sat under stage lights, sharing her journey as a single mother. I sat in the audience, holding Chloe and Sophia, trying to keep them quiet as Ava spoke. She was nervous at first, but when the audience clapped, I saw her relax. I didn't do it alone, she said, her eyes finding me in the crowd. My brother Caleb pulled me out of the darkness. I bowed my head, pretending to fix Sophia's hair, but really I was hiding the tears welling in my eyes. That talk show was just the beginning. A month later, Ava was invited to a women's conference in Seattle. She stood on stage before hundreds of women telling her story with a sincerity that silenced the room. When she finished, the applause roared like thunder. I didn't go that time. I had to stay home with Chloe and Sophia, but Ava called me right after, her voice breaking with emotion. Caleb, they gave me a standing ovation. They said I inspired them. I smiled through the phone, though I felt a hollow ache inside. You deserve it, Ava, I said, But when I hung up, I looked around the small apartment, cluttered with bottles and baby toys, and wondered, what about me? I'd sacrificed my marriage, put Ava and the girls above everything. I didn't regret it, but I couldn't deny that Ava's brilliance, as radiant as it was, cast a long shadow over my life. One day Ben called me, his voice brimming with excitement. Caleb, we want to host a special event in Portland, a big talk, and we want you and Ava on stage together. Your story, your bond, your sacrifice, is the heart of the book. I hesitated. I'm not a speaker, Ben. That's Ava's thing. But you're part of the story, Ben said. People want to hear from you, Caleb. They want to know about the brother who did everything for his sister. I didn't want to do it honestly. I didn't like the spotlight or speaking to crowds, but Ava convinced me. Caleb, please, she said, taking my hand. I want people to know how amazing you are. So I agreed. The event took place at a small theater in downtown Portland with over 500 people in the audience. I stood backstage, hands sweating, watching Ava step onto the stage, radiant in her familiar green dress. She told her story as she had done hundreds of times, but this time she paused and turned to me. My brother Caleb saved me, she said, her voice choking. He didn't just give me a home. He gave me the belief that I could stand again. The audience clapped and I walked out, the stage lights blinding me, making me want to retreat backstage. But Ava held my hand and I stood there telling my story, not as a speaker, but as a brother. I talked about the rainy night driving 3 hours to pick up Ava and the difficult days that followed. I'm not a hero, I said, my voice hoarse. I'm just a brother doing what I had to do. When we finished, the audience stood, their applause echoing. I looked at Ava, saw her smiling through tears, and felt that everything, the sacrifices, the pain, the sleepless nights, was worth it. We had healed together, not just for ourselves, but for the thousands of people listening to our story. The glow of Ava's success seemed like it would last forever, but life, as I'd learned, never lacked storms. Just a few weeks after our joint talk in Portland, a letter arrived, sent through the mail, sealed in a white envelope with my mother's rigid handwriting. As I opened it, an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. Inside was a short, cold letter from our parents, Walter and Susan Miller. Ava, the letter read, your book is an affront to the family's honor. You have publicly slandered us, causing the entire neighborhood to shun us. We demand that you withdraw the book from the market and issue a public apology. If not, we will take legal action. I read it over and over, feeling as though the blood in my veins had stopped flowing. Our parents, the ones who had turned Ava away in the rain, now dared to threaten her. I clenched the letter in my hand, trying to suppress my anger, then called Ava into the kitchen. Read this, I said, handing her the letter. Ava scanned the lines, her face shifting from shock to pain and finally to a resolve I'd never seen before. They want me to withdraw the book? She asked, her voice trembling but sharp. After everything they've done, they disowned me, Caleb. They called Chloe and Sophia stains. And now they want me to apologize. What are you going to do? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Ava folded the letter and set it on the table. I am not withdrawing the book. This is my story, our story. I won't let them control me anymore. I nodded, squeezing her hand. I'm with you, no matter what happens. But I didn't expect our parents to go so far. A week later, we received a legal notice from a lawyer in Seattle. Walter and Susan Miller were officially suing Ava for defamation of character. They argued that, while not named directly, Ava's book portrayed them as cruel parents, causing their community to shun them. The lawsuit demanded the book's withdrawal, financial compensation, and a public apology. I was stunned. I knew our parents valued appearances, but suing their own daughter. I looked at Ava, fearing she'd break, but she only clenched her fists, her eyes blazing. They want to fight. Fine, she said. I'm not backing down. News of the lawsuit spread quickly. A Seattle newspaper ran a story with the headline, Parents Sue Daughter for Daring to Tell the Truth. The article quoted passages from Ava's book, particularly her description of the rainy night when she was turned away at our parents' door. Social media erupted. Some criticized Ava, saying she'd gone too far by airing family matters. But most, especially those who'd read her book, stood by her. Ava Miller is a brave mother, one post read. She told the truth, and now her family wants to silence her. The post was shared thousands of times, turning the lawsuit into a national story. I tried to keep Ava focused, but the pressure mounted. TV stations invited her for interviews, wanting her to talk about the lawsuit and our parents. Ava declined most, saying simply, "I wrote the truth. I don't regret it." But I saw her starting to lose sleep, dark circles forming under her eyes as she held Chloe and Sophia. I knew she was trying to stay strong, but the lawsuit was another knife, cutting into old wounds. I didn't stay on the sidelines. I contacted Jessica, an old lawyer friend who'd worked with Abigail and whom I trusted. Jessica agreed to take the case after reading Ava's book. "Her story is powerful, Caleb," Jessica said over the phone. "I'll do everything to protect her." Jessica began gathering evidence. She asked Ava to recount every detail of that rainy night, and I'll never forget the evening she sat with Ava, taking notes as Ava's voice trembled. Ava described knocking on our parents' door, clutching Chloe and Sophia, begging to be let in. She shared the text message our mother sent afterward. "Don't ever come back, Ava." Jessica uncovered security footage from a neighbor's house, capturing Ava standing in the rain, holding her two girls. The blurry image was undeniable proof. Jessica also found an old voicemail from our father on Ava's phone calling her, a stain on the family, and a call after that night. On the day of the trial, I sat beside Ava in the courtroom, feeling like I was stepping into a construction site I couldn't control. Our parents sat across the room, Dad in a pristine suit, Mom with the rigid smile I recognized from old family photos. They didn't look at us, but I saw Dad's hands clenched tightly, and Mom kept smoothing her hair, as if trying to maintain her perfect image. Their lawyer argued that Ava's book had ruined their reputation, causing neighbors and friends to turn away. Ms. Miller deliberately defamed her parents, the lawyer said sharply. She not only fabricated the truth, but exploited her story for profit. Jessica stood, calm but incisive. She presented the evidence, the text from Mom, the security footage, and Dad's voicemail. Each piece was like a hammer, dismantling the other side's argument. When the footage played on the courtroom screen, showing Ava shivering in the rain with her babies, the room fell silent. I saw a few people wipe away tears. Ava gripped my hand under the table, her breath shaky. When the judge asked Ava to speak, she stood, her voice clear despite a slight tremble. "I didn't write the book to hurt anyone," she said. "I wrote it to heal, to tell other women they're not alone. If the truth hurts, that's not my fault." The trial lasted 3 days, but to me it felt like 3 years. In the end, the judge ruled in Ava's favor. The book did not defame anyone, as everything she wrote was true, backed by clear evidence. Our parents were ordered to pay legal fees, but what hurt the most was the media's backlash. Major outlets reported Miller family loses lawsuit against daughter for trying to silence the truth. Social media branded our parents toxic, and the red brick house in Seattle where I grew up became the focus of public criticism. I didn't feel victorious. As we left the courtroom, I looked at Ava, saw her holding Chloe and Sophia tightly, but her eyes weren't joyful. "Caleb," she whispered, "I just wanted them to understand." I took her hand, saying nothing. No words could erase this pain. Our parents had chosen their pride over their daughter, and now they'd lost both. After the lawsuit with our parents, it seemed like life might finally settle into some semblance of peace, but I soon learned that storms never come alone. The success of Ava's memoir, Shelter from the Storm, had propelled her to new heights, but it also brought unforeseen troubles. The next storm, following the legal battle with our parents, was Ethan Campbell, the ex-husband who had shattered Ava's world. In the book, Ava didn't name Ethan directly, but details like a Seattle advertising creative director were unmistakable to anyone who knew them. Social media with the speed of a wildfire quickly uncovered his identity. A Twitter account posted, "Anyone else realize the man in Ava Miller's book is Ethan Campbell, creative director at D&K Advertising?" The post included a photo of Ethan in a sleek suit sporting his smug smile, and within hours it spread across forums. The fallout was swift, like a tsunami. Ethan was fired from his company that same week, citing behavior damaging to the brand's reputation. His new girlfriend, the younger colleague he'd left Ava for, dumped him shortly after the scandal broke. Tabloids branded Ethan, the coward who abandoned his family, and his image once that of a successful man was now tied to scathing online comments. I didn't follow social media much, but Ava showed me a viral post. Ethan Campbell, the man who chose suits and a mistress over his wife and kids. Despicable. I felt no pity. He got what he deserved. But one morning as I was brewing coffee in the kitchen, Ava walked in clutching her phone, her face pale. "Caleb," she whispered. "Ethan just emailed me." I froze looking at her. "What does he want?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. Ava opened the email and read aloud. "Ava, I know I messed up. I want to see Chloe and Sophia. I want to apologize to you. Please give me a chance." She looked up, her eyes confused. "What do you think?" I don't know what to do." I gripped my coffee mug, trying to keep my voice calm. "You don't owe him anything, Ava. He abandoned you and the girls. He's only crawling back now because he's backed into a corner." But Ava, with her ever-soft heart, hesitated. Maybe he really regrets it," she said, her voice barely audible. "Chloe and Sophia are his daughters. They deserve to know their father." I didn't want to argue, but I didn't trust Ethan. Men like him don't change after a few months of public shaming. I just nodded and said, "Think it over carefully. Don't rush into anything." But inside I was on high alert. Ethan didn't stop at the email. He started calling, texting, and one afternoon when I returned from a construction site, I found him standing outside our apartment, his coat soaked from Portland's rain. He looked more haggard than I remembered, hair disheveled, eyes shadowed, but that smug smile still lingered. "Caleb," he said, raising a hand as if to shake mine. "I just want to talk to Ava." I crossed my arms, blocking the door. "She doesn't want to see you." "Leave, Ethan." He sighed as if I were making things difficult for him. "Look, I know I screwed up, but I'm Chloe and Sophia's father. I have a right to see them." "Rights?" I snapped, anger surging. "You lost those when you ditched them for another woman. Get out of here before I call the cops." Ethan stepped back, but his eyes didn't leave mine. "You can't keep me from my kids forever, Caleb," he said, then turned and walked away. I stood there, my heart pounding, feeling like I'd just faced a wolf. I told Ava about the encounter, and she grew anxious. "Caleb, what if Ethan really wants to see the girls? I don't want Chloe and Sophia to grow up not knowing their father." I took her hand, keeping my voice gentle. "Ava, he doesn't care about the girls. He's just using you, using your fame to salvage his image." After that confrontation, Ethan started showing up everywhere. At a book signing in Seattle, he appeared in the crowd, standing in the front row, his eyes locked on Ava. I was backstage holding Sophia when he stepped forward, raising a hand as if to speak. "Ava," he called, loud enough to silence the room. "I'm sorry. I was wrong to leave you and the kids. I just want a chance to make things right," the audience murmured. Some pulled out phones to record. Ava froze on stage, her hand gripping her signing pen, her face pale. I wanted to rush out and drag him away, but Ava raised a hand, signaling me to stop. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "If you're truly sorry, you'll leave me and the kids alone. Don't turn this into a performance." The crowd applauded, but Ethan didn't leave immediately. He stood there, staring at her, then lowered his head and walked out. The clip of the incident went viral. Some sympathized with Ethan, calling him a father seeking redemption, but most condemned him, accusing him of staging a publicity stunt to restore his reputation. Public opinion split, and Ava became the center of heated debates. "I didn't want this, Caleb," she said one night, burying her face in her hands. "I just want to protect Chloe and Sophia." But Ethan didn't stop. He began sending gifts to Chloe and Sophia's preschool, teddy bears, coloring books, and handwritten notes saying, "I love you." The teachers called Ava, concerned about the girls' safety. Ava grew terrified, checking the windows every night, sleeping with Chloe and Sophia in her arms instead of their cribs. My anger swelled. Ethan wasn't just harassing Ava. He was threatening the peace we'd fought to build. "Enough," I said one morning after Ava received another text from Ethan. "We need to end this." I contacted Jessica, the lawyer who'd helped us in the lawsuit against our parents. Jessica agreed to draft a restraining order citing Ethan's harassment and the psychological harm it was causing Ava and the girls. We gathered evidence, emails, texts, the clip from the book signing, and reports from the preschool about the unsolicited gifts. Jessica filed the petition, requesting a 3-year restraining order barring Ethan from contacting Ava, Chloe, or Sophia, and mandating that he undergo psychological counseling and a parenting responsibility program. On the court date, I sat beside Ava, feeling like we were entering another battle. Ethan appeared, dressed in a suit but no longer polished. He looked at Ava, his eyes pleading, but she didn't respond. Jessica presented the evidence, emphasizing that Ethan's actions weren't remorse, but dangerous obsession. Ethan's lawyer argued he was only trying to reconnect with his children, but the judge wasn't swayed. The ruling came after 2 hours. Ethan was barred from contacting Ava, Chloe, or Sophia for 3 years. He was ordered to attend mandatory counseling and complete a parenting responsibility program before he could petition to revisit his visitation rights. As the judge's gavel fell, Ava let out a shaky breath, gripping my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan left the courtroom without looking at us. I don't know if he'll ever change, but I know that for the next 3 years Ava and the girls will be safe. After the lawsuit with Ethan, our lives slowly found a rhythm again, though the scars remained. Ava, Chloe, Sophia, and I returned to the small apartment, where the sound of rain tapping on the windows felt like an old friend. But now the apartment no longer carried the heavy weight it once did. There was a lightness, as if we had weathered the biggest storms and finally glimpsed the light. Ava didn't stop. She began writing a sequel to Shelter from the Storm, a new memoir titled Freedom is When You No Longer Need Forgiveness. This book wasn't just about her journey as a single mother. It chronicled the battles she'd faced with Ethan, with our parents, and with the doubts within herself. She wrote about me, about how I stood by her through every tempest, and about Chloe and Sophia, 2 little girls growing up surrounded by the love of a community larger than their biological family. I stayed on the sidelines, as was my habit. I read her drafts, offered a few suggestions, and looked after Chloe and Sophia when she was busy. But this time, Ava didn't need my nudging. She had found her own strength. When her second book was released, it quickly became a resounding success, hitting bestseller lists within weeks. Reviews called it a manifesto of resilience, and Ava was invited to more events, from women's conferences to packed book signings. Chloe and Sophia, now nearly 3 years old, were growing up healthy and radiant. They loved running around in the park near our home, where I'd push them on the swings laughing as Sophia tried to catch a butterfly, or as Chloe scribbled colorful chalk drawings on the pavement. The Portland community adored them, calling them Ava's little girls. Every time I dropped them off at preschool, I saw teachers and parents looking at them with affection, as if they belonged to the whole neighborhood. I found my own peace, too. Each morning I brewed coffee, read books with Chloe and Sophia, or tended to the small garden on the balcony where I grew mint and daisies. My life was no longer a perfect technical drawing, but it was full in ways I hadn't expected. I didn't contact Abigail anymore, though sometimes I wondered if she was happy. But I had no regrets. Ava, Chloe, and Sophia were my family, and I'd made the right choice. At one of Ava's book signings in Portland, I stood in the corner watching her chat with readers. She was radiant, confident, as if her glow had become a part of her. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, approached and hugged Ava tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You saved my life," she said, her voice choked. "Your book helped me stand up after my family disowned me." Ava hugged her back, smiling gently. "It wasn't me," she said, her eyes finding me in the crowd. "It was my brother." I looked down, pretending to adjust my shirt, but my heart tightened. I didn't need the spotlight or the praise, but in that moment, as Ava looked at me with gratitude, I knew every sacrifice I'd made was worth it. When the signing ended, we returned to the apartment, Chloe and Sophia dozing on my shoulders. Ava sat beside me on the sofa, her head resting on my shoulder like when we were kids. "Caleb," she whispered, "thank you for everything." I smiled, ruffling her hair. "Go to sleep, little sis. Tomorrow's a new day." Outside, the Portland rain still fell, but this time it didn't feel sad. It was a reminder that, no matter how many storms came, we had learned to stand strong, together.